As she approached their spot, with her well-thumbed wonderland in hand, she could see fabrics fluttering in the gentle breeze. At the edge of the trees, Phelan had set out a small table covered in lace and linens, flanked by wooden folding chairs. In the center of the table was a painted china teapot, surrounded by matching cups and saucers and several small dishes, some with neatly cut 2-bite sandwiches and some with pastel-hued petit fours decorated with miniature icing roses. One plate was laid with a bundle of blue flowers. For the heat, there was also a tall glass pitcher of lemonade with ice and slivers of lemon at the top, just the way she liked. This is amazing. It's just beautiful. She wanted to keep gushing about how special it was and how nobody had ever done something like this before, but she worried it would come out sounding like a bad soap opera scene. Her eyes were wet. She hoped he wouldn't notice. And then she hoped he would.
I'm glad you like it.
I love it. It's amazing. You're amazing. She knew she must sound like an excited child, but didn't care. She picked up the bunch of flowers and held them up. What kind are they? They're lovely.
Forget-me-nots. They grow along the banks of the stream up closer to my end. They're abundant in our homeland as well. Do you like them?
Forget-me-nots. She smiled. I love them. They might just be my new favorite.
What was your old favorite?
Lavender. But I think lavender and forget-me-nots would look very pretty together, don't you?
Aye.
Thank you. She went over to him and put her arms around him. After a few moments, he put his arms around her as well, and they held on to each other for some time. She looked up at him, searching his eyes for his feelings, willing him to kiss her. She thought for a moment that he might, but then he smiled gently and dropped his arms, taking a step around her to the chair behind her.
You're welcome. No, please, sit.
With a sigh, August sat down, determined to enjoy their time in whatever form it took. She spread an embroidered linen napkin on her lap, ate tiny cakes and sipped orange spiced tea, and talked to the man she had come to believe she was in love with. She watched the sun catching the colors of his hair, strands of silver, black and steel, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. He read the characters in different voices.
The nervous hatter, the sleepy dormouse, the dreamy Cheshire cat, and the imperious queen.
Which made August honk out her most embarrassing laugh. She listened closely to those fantastic words falling from his mouth, and she felt completely smitten. The reading done and the cakes and sandwiches gone, they took to the rocks on the creek's edge. They dipped their feet into the cool water and discussed fussy white rabbits and giant top hats, curious little girls and words that turned themselves inside out and made each other laugh more times than she could count. She had been nursing a glass of lemonade while the sun dipped lower into the sky, slowly turning the clouds to sherbet orange, and as she drained the last of the liquid, end tilted high, the icy clump at the bottom of the glass came crashing down on her nose. She squeaked in surprise, and the ice clattered out onto the rocks around her, leaving a sticky mess down her neck and on the dress. She felt a hot flush of embarrassment, picturing herself surrounded by mishaps and feeling like a disaster. But Phelan smiled in his gentle way, neither mocking nor judging, and through his eyes she was no longer the wreck she deemed herself. She realized that his understanding and embracing of her, of who she was encouraging a sort of bravery within her. More and more she felt safe to be herself, disasters and all, and trusted him to never think less of her. Maybe, she thought with a shy inner smile, he even found it was adorable at times. Another day, not long after, she relished the fact that she was sitting on a blanket by a stream at the edge of the woods, laughing with a handsome, intelligent man and talking about Jules Verne, and how someday, soon, everybody might be able to have tiny telephones in their pockets and could even call people in space with them. The creek was quite full and fast-moving from several recent thunderstorms, and though the water sparkled orange with late afternoon sun, August felt chilled by incoming evening air. She stood up to dust off her bottoms, suggesting they go for a walk to keep their blood moving, and with the idea she might get to hold Phelan's hand. But as she straightened, she slipped on the damp edge of a rock and fell into the waterhole, whacking her elbow and twisting her ankle on the way in. She didn't even have time to think about how ironic it was that she'd been skillfully jumping rocks and climbing trees only the day before. Phelan jumped in immediately and fished her out of the stream. August's dress, an airy cotton gauze that felt like feathers a moment ago, was now soaked and clinging to her. It wasn't long before her ankle began to throb.
Red dear, are you okay?
She managed a small, tight-lipped nod. Phelan lifted her in his arms and carried her up the slope to his house. He kicked open the back door, grabbed a quilt that was draped over the back of a chair, and gently set her onto a red velvet couch. August recognized the library room from the night she was inadvertently spying on him. The wall was covered in books from floor to ceiling, which was nearly 2 stories high. He wrapped the quilt snugly around her, took another quick look at her ankle, and stepped briskly into the hall, pulling his shirt over his head and sending water spray everywhere. A few moments later, he was back with a first aid kit. He was wearing only a towel on his lower half, and August's heart nearly stopped at the sight of him. The throbbing in her ankle and her elbow pulsed hard with her heart, while the rest of the world around her disappeared.
Don't worry, lass. We'll get you fixed up.
He knelt beside the couch and examined her ankle.
Does this hurt?
Yeah, not too bad, but yeah.
I think it's just sprained.
August wanted nothing more than to curl up against his chest.
We'll wrap it first and put some ice on it. Would you like something for the pain?
Just the ice, thanks. When Phelan returned with the ice, he was wearing a robe, and she nearly cried out with disappointment. Although, she acknowledged to herself, he did look cozy and domestic in that tartan wrap. She told him her ankle was already feeling better, and he was visibly relieved. But then he sniffed the air briefly and turned to look at her more closely. He opened the blanket and took her hands, and when he turned them over, something warm ran down her arms. I seem to be bleeding. For a moment, it looked like he might lick her, but he only leaned in and wiped the blood away and peered at her elbow.
It's not bad. Just a little gash. I've got something for that as well, not to worry.
He cleaned the wound with hydrogen peroxide, patted it dry, then taped a bit of sterile gauze over it. He bent forward and gave her elbow a little kiss. It seemed at that one moment, with Phelan close enough for August to feel the warmth of his breath, they both noticed that her wet white dress now revealed all of what nature made of her. He looked away from her bosom and into her eyes. She was breathing harder, as was he, and the two of them hung there together as something passed between them. Then she leaned forward and gently touched her parted lips to his. They breathed each other in, slow and deep, just breathing, his sweet breath and his warmth swirling down the center of her. She rested her hand on his chest where the robe made a deep V and tangled her fingers into the light and dark curls. A quiet moan rose up from her throat, and she pressed her mouth tighter to his and slipped her tongue between his lips. She felt Phelan hungrily receive her, but he abruptly broke off the kiss and stood up away from her. There was a distinct bulge under his robe, but he quickly turned away.
I'm sorry. I should not have done that.
August immediately attempted to protest, but he shook his head and disappeared into the other room. She was too startled by what had just happened to call after him, and then he was back with pajama pants under the robe. He began pacing and running his hands through his hair, looking down at the floorboards.
August.
Her heart was pounding. This was the first time he'd ever used her proper name, and she knew that couldn't be good. Was he going to say she had to leave? Or worse, that he didn't want her there? She sat up straight, pulling the blanket tight around her, and began to shiver, even though she was no longer chilled. He walked back to her, kneeled down, put his hands on her knees, and looked into her eyes. She swallowed hard and held her breath.
August, I think we've arrived at a dangerous place.
Here.